Australia then detailing its plans to buy those 5 U.S. nuclear-powered submarines on Monday. Now, that announcement came at a meeting in San Diego between the U.S. president alongside the Australian and British prime ministers. For more, our international affairs editor, Philip Turle, joins me on set. Good morning, Philip.
Morning, Aaron.
So this deal, of course, was signed as a part of that newly formed AUKUS alliance. Tell us what that alliance is and why it's so important.
Well, let's have a look at the deal first, shall we, to see exactly what this is all about. Now, it was announced back in September 2021. That's at the end of the French deal. I'll come back to that in a few minutes. To provide 5 nuclear submarines by 2033. Now, for the moment, there are 3 that have been promised, with another 2 probably on the way. There will also be the development of a new built US-UK submarine by 2040. That's going to be called SSN AUKUS. And the third most important thing about this is there's going to be a joint development project to produce hypersonic missiles as well as submarines. All of that to boost the defence of Australia and the United States in the South Pacific, to counterbalance what they say is the growing intransigence and saber-rattling of China in that region. It's also going to convince China, they hope, that it no longer is operating in a permissive environment where it can do whatever it likes. But there's one thing which is important to underline here, that these are nuclear submarines that are going to be provided for Australia. They're going to be built in Adelaide. That's going to produce jobs for Australian engineers. But there will be no nuclear weapons on these submarines and no nuclear weapons based in Australia. This is just nuclear-powered submarines that we're talking about.
Philip, the current context, of course, is important when analysing this deal. It comes as China ramps up its anti-Western rhetoric and strengthens its military. How has Beijing reacted thus far to this latest announcement?
Well, Beijing's already announced that it's going to up its military spending again this year, $224 billion for 2023. That's up 7.2% over 2022, the largest annual increase since 2019, but an increase it is steadily over the past 8 years for military spending, the defense budget in Beijing. It's not the only country to increase its military spending. The United States as well. They're upping its military spending to $842 billion for the next year to 2024. That's up 3.2%. There are also increases in France, here in France, and also in the United Kingdom. So definitely an increase in military spending pretty much in the world's biggest military countries. Now, the reaction from the Chinese, well, it's been a pretty negative reaction. They have accused the US and the Australians and the British of dangerous behaviour in the South Pacific. A quote from the Chinese leadership saying the AUKUS deal is in violation of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and the transfer of nuclear weapons material from a nuclear weapon state to a non-nuclear weapon state is a blatant violation. And the foreign minister of China says that unless America hits the brakes on its provocation in the South Pacific, then conflict and confrontation will follow. Now, this is an upping of the ante by the Chinese because they say that they want to do their own military expansion. They don't want the US and other nations to try to put a halt to that. I think this is part of Xi Jinping, the Chinese president's efforts to try to draw new battle lines in their confrontation with the West. But it certainly has increased, I think, the stress level between those different nations, and that explains why we've seen this AUKUS deal signed here in San Diego.
Now, do those concerns, Philip, mean that the diplomatic spat with France has been forgotten?
Well, yes and no. I think that definitely we remember back in 2019, this big diplomatic spat and the horror, anger of France over the fact that the deal that they'd signed with Australia to provide nuclear submarines was suddenly scuppered. Remember, it was $66 billion, an agreement for 12 diesel submarines. That's a different submarine to the nuclear submarine. It's less well-performing underwater than the nuclear submarines, which explains why that deal was suddenly changed and given to the Americans. It was confirmed back in August 2021, but then cancelled in September 2021, much to the anger of the of French authorities. Since then, the relationship has been rebuilt, principally because of the war in Ukraine, because the Americans and the French have a common interest in supplying weapons to the Ukrainians, which they are both doing, certainly more the Americans than the French. The British also are doing that. And I think also there's a feeling here in France that France has been given back what it's owed, its dues. That can be seen by the visit of Joe Biden to France and the state visit by Emmanuel Macron last December to the United States. So no more mention of the AUKUS deal between France and the US, all those rivalries and those problems and those diplomatic incidents that the cancellation of that deal provoked back in 2021 seem to have been swept under the carpet since then.
Philip Turle, thank you very much.